Hey there, it's Jody. I am going to show you today how I plant seeds indoors to create a garden that looks like this. I've been a gardener for about 10 years now, but I planted my first packet of seeds with my mother when I was a teenager. I've had some years where my tomatoes and squash flourished, but my brassicas were eaten by moths. My point being, I want to save you time with what I've learned in my garden over the years. Here's a checklist of the garden supplies you'll need to start your seeds indoors. Soil or seed starting pellets, garden pots or seed starting pellets, large container, a couple of gallons of water, seedling tray and cover, warm area, sunny location or grow lights, gloves, seed dibber, hardiness zone, frost date, seeds, garden labels, and a garden notebook. Let's get into detail about each item on the checklist, and then I'll walk you through 6 easy steps to grow plants from seed. There's many options when it comes to seed starting, and I use 3 types every year. Seed starting pellets, best for new or lazy gardeners. Second option is just seed starting, so you don't have to add anything with it. And then the third one is 3 ingredients. You're going to have your regular soil mix, and you're going to have perlite, which is this here, and then you'll add some worm compost. Let's talk about containers for your garden pots. Store-bought plastic containers. One of my favorites for new gardeners and for veterans that are really lazy. Seed starting pellets. I'll show you how to use these later. The other option is garden fabric pots. I prefer using these or the pellets as they seem to germinate faster than the plastic containers, likely due to the fabric. But you can also start your seedlings with items you have around the house. I've used everything from plastic food containers, produce plastic trays, chicken rotisserie containers, or Tupperware with holes at the bottom, seedling tray and seedling tray cover. Seedling trays contain no drain holes, allowing you to place your pots in them to water the seedlings from the bottom. You'll also need a cover for the germination tray. I've used everything from store-bought seedling tray covers to clear shower curtains, plastic cup covers, and saran wrap. Warm area to germinate seeds. To germinate the seeds, you'll need a warm place. The top of the fridge works fairly well. However, if you can invest in a germination heat mat, it makes the process much easier. A sunny area or grow lights to grow the seedlings indoors. Garden or plastic gloves. Sharpie marker or pencil to use as a dibber. When handling the seed packets and seeds, you're going to want to have your hands clean, so I often take off my gloves to handle the seeds, but place the gloves back on when you're dealing with the pots or the soil. Hardiness zone. Know your plant's hardiness zone for your city and state. Do an internet search with what is my hardiness zone in your city and state. Write it down and memorize it. You'll want to refer to your hardiness zone during the time you purchase seeds. You'll also want to know your last frost date for your city and state. Do an internet search for what is my last frost date for your city and state. Understanding your last frost date will help you know when you can put your plants outside or when you can sow your seeds outdoors. Seeds. Select seeds that you want to grow based on your hardiness zone. I'll explain more later in this video. Garden labels. But my favorite homemade version is old window blinds. Other options include popsicle sticks, plastic utensils, and pencils. And if you have a label maker, it makes it much more legible. Large container and a gallon of water. Grab a large container for your bag of soil. This will speed up the time it takes to fill up your pots. As for water, I like using rainwater or tap water that's been sitting in a container overnight to reduce the chlorine. Garden notebook. My notebook is my lifeline to my garden, as it keeps everything from garden layout sketches to how many days it takes for specific seeds to mature and more. Make sure it's a notebook that's designated only for your garden. How to grow plants from seed. Now that you know what you need to get started, let's talk about the seed selection. This topic can be its own video, but here's the basics. At this point, you're feeling excited or worried that you're gonna do something wrong. Believe me, the seed selection is the most addicting part of gardening. If you already know what seeds you're gonna be planting based on your hardiness zone and your last frost date, move to the next step. For new gardeners, once you decide the seeds you wanna plant, you could read every single seed packet. But what I like to do, I typically will separate them into tender plants. So things like peppers, squash, tomatoes, and I will separate the cold hardy plants. So things like kale, brassicas, cauliflowers, lettuces, and peas. Hardy plants have a resistance to cold temperatures. Lettuce, peas, and brassicas, for instance, don't mind being planted before the last frost date, but I still plant them indoors and then I'll move them out into the garden. Tender plants prefer warmer temperatures. Tomatoes and beans can be planted indoors about 4 weeks before the last frost. For instance, tomatoes, they can handle about 50 degrees, but if the temperature drops indoors a little, they're known to survive, unlike peppers. Ultra tender plants. Well, this is based on my own experience. Peppers, zucchinis, and cucumbers, they seem a bit more finicky about drastic temperature changes. They prefer 60 degrees or higher to thrive. So what I like to do is plant them 2 weeks after the frost date indoors. They seem much happier when the greenhouse is warmer in the evenings. Next, grab your designated garden book and write down the following for each seed you are planting: type of plant and seed variety, planted date, days to germinate, days to maturity, when to fertilize. Leave that blank to fill out later. An area for note. This is an area you can fill out at a later time. Reference a seed packet for answers to these questions. If there's any information missing, do an internet search for the missing information. For instance, do a search for how many days to germinate or how many days to maturity for the seed variety. Now that you're all set with how many days to germinate and how many days to maturity, you have a reference sheet for your seeds to check back frequently. Eventually, you can set up reminders in your calendar. Lastly, create all of the garden labels for the seeds and place them with your seed packets. This makes the seed planting process much smoother. Otherwise, a mislabeled plant is a confused plant. You won't know what it is, and it's a frustrating experience, believe me. Now that you've selected your seeds, let's move on to step 3, the preparation of your garden pots. Select the pots you'll be using and make sure that they have holes in them. For option 1, if you have the pellets, put them in your germination tray. You're gonna add water all the way to the top. They'll float, don't worry. Give it about 5 to 10 minutes and they'll end up like this. Option 2, for those using the seed starting soil, add the soil to your large container and add water. The moisture isn't as noticeable as with potting soil. Do your best to ensure it's damp, but not soggy. For those of you using generic potting soil, for option 3, you'll want 80% potting mix, 10% worm compost, 10% perlite, or you can use vermiculite. This is about 8 cups here, so what I will do, add 10% perlite or vermiculite, 10% worm compost into your large container and add water. You want it light and fluffy in texture, not soggy. The perlite and vermiculite prevents the roots from getting too compacted or soggy. If your potting soil already contains compost or fertilizer, you can skip the worm compost. Add the soil in your pots and place them in the seedling trays. Now I'm going to show you how I fill up the pots. And as you're adding it, you can press a little bit, but don't compact it at this point. What you're trying to do is make sure it's full enough, but not over full. A little bit more. And that is a really good size right here. It's fairly dirty thanks to my gloves. So there is one pot. And at this point, you will add it to your germination tray. Finally, you're at step 4, the seed planting process. Grab the Sharpie or dibber, pot, your seed packets, and labels. Insert the labels into the pots and plant the seeds. Gently place the seeds from the packet into your hand. If the seeds are tiny, pinch them with your fingers and sprinkle them on top of the soil. The best method to use is to plant the seeds at a depth equal to 2 or 3 times of the seed's width. If it's still confusing, I lightly push the Sharpie, acting as a dipper, in the soil and make sure it's not too deep. I also tend to plant 2 seeds per pot for fruit-bearing plants like tomatoes and zucchinis. For brassicas and lettuce, they have really small seeds, so I sprinkle a light amount of seeds and ruffle the soil. Now with step 5, you'll move your germination tray to a warm place. I like putting my germination trays in the basement on a shelf with a germination heating mat. At this point, if the soil is a bit dry, add a little water at the bottom of the germination tray, making sure it's shallow for the pots to prevent them from sitting in the water for too long. Try not to splash water at the top of the seedling pot, as seeds have been known to splash out of the pot or they shift placement within the soil. Cover the germination trays and you're done with the seed starting process, but let's make sure that we get them past that germination process, shall we? Now it's time to wait. You're in a monitoring phase at step 6. You're excited about the possibilities for new seedlings as well. For new gardeners, check on the seedlings daily to see if any seedlings surface and make sure the pots aren't too dry or too wet. Once the seedling sprouts, move them to another germination tray. Place that germination tray near a window or under your grow lights. If you're past the last frost date, you can also bring the seedlings outside for about 4 to 6 hours a day. But believe me, it gets super labor intensive. You'll also want to set a timer to remind yourself to go outside to bring them in every night. Continue to monitor the seeds that haven't surfaced for up to 12 days. If it looks like you have some duds with no seedling sprouts, you can give up on them and start new seeds at a later time. But what I like to do, I take the pots outside and place them in a sunny location in the garden to see if nature will take its course. Sometimes those seeds surface. If you're curious about transplanting your seedlings in the garden, you can check the next video about how to transplant your seedlings. I'm sure these tips will help you start your plants from seed. Please let me know if you have any questions. Until next time.